Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. It's Dr. Delicia here. I just wanted to hop on and connect and say hello. Um, a couple of weeks ago, I had a question posed, and I really appreciate all the questions that we get here. And someone had asked me what was the difference between grieving and depression. And at the time, when that person asked me what the difference was between grieving and depression, I don't even think they knew what was going on in my own life, but I'd recently lost my mom, and I was not ignoring you. I just really wasn't in the space where I could even, talk about that. Um, but as promised, I did want to address the question as always. Um, and not have you feel like I was ignoring you on purpose. But sometimes you have to give yourself a certain amount of space and distance from topics that might be hitting too close to home at the moment. I'm Dr. Delicia Haynes. I'm the founder and CEO of Family First Health Center. I'm a board certified physician. I'm also a medical student mental health advocate. So I shine a light of hope for medical students who are dealing with stress and depression and helping them overcome both stress and depression. And that's one of the reasons that I come on and I do these Facebook Lives. It's some of the reasons that I do the speaking engagements, is to really just, shine that light on this issue that's so pervasive and oftentimes still has a stigma, and people don't get the help that they need. So as I was saying, a few weeks ago, someone asked me what was the difference between depression and grief. And so I wanted to address that this evening. So the first thing is to actually understand what depression is and how depression is diagnosed, because depression isn't just sadness. A lot of people in today's kind of atmosphere, we use the term depression very casually. So people who actually suffer from major depression feel like they are always told, oh, just snap out of it. But there's a big difference between depression and sadness. And so, first of all, I think it's important to go over, what depression is. So there is a classification that we use by the DSM, is the manual that clinical psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers use when they're diagnosing people. And in that, you have to have 5 of 9 different categories or 9 different symptoms in order to be classified with major depression. So you must have a depressed mood in order to be diagnosed with depression. You also have to have a marked or diminished interest in activities that you would usually interest you. So it's also known as anhedonia, just nothing kind of makes you happy or brings you any kind of joy or pleasure. So those 2 you must have. And then some of the others are a significant increase or decrease in weight, sleeping all the time or not sleeping at all are symptoms. Having what's called psychomotor agitation, where you're anxious and you're kind of moving a lot, or what's called psychomotor retardation, where you just are, everything about you is kind of sloughed over and depressed and you're not moving at all. Fatigue and loss of energy are big symptoms in depression, and feelings of worthlessness and guilt are some of the symptoms of depression, as well as difficulty with thinking and concentrating and difficulty making decisions, and then also having recurrent thoughts of death or having thoughts of suicide. So all 9 of those are symptoms that are associated with depression, and you have to have 5 of those in order to be diagnosed with depression. What's also important is that you have all 5 of those for at least 2 weeks. So people often ask, what's the difference between, sadness and depression? So you can have some of those symptoms when you're sad. You can have some of those symptoms, but generally it's not going to be happening every day for most of the day for a period of 2 weeks. So if it hasn't gone to that 2-week period, you won't be diagnosed with major depression. So that's a very important distinction because sadness is a normal emotion that happens when something, an external circumstance. So, if someone has a breakup and they're going through a bad breakup, and for the next week they may have a lot of those symptoms, and then those symptoms start to abate, and they wouldn't be classified as being depressed, versus someone who may not have any event that happens, because you don't have to have an event happen in order to become depressed. It's more of a chemical thing than an external thing. And that person who has all those symptoms every day for most of the day for 2 weeks, who has 5 of those symptoms for every day, most of the day for 2 weeks, would be classified as depressed. So that really is kind of more on the difference between sadness and depression. But the question that was posed to me was a question specifically about the difference between depression and grief. And it's an interesting question because I mentioned that the DSM-4 is the diagnostic guide that's used by psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers. And it comes out with different versions. So there was a DSM-4, and then there was a DSM-5. And so in the DSM-4, they made a distinction where you wouldn't be classified as having depression if it could be explained by grief. So if you had that external thing that was going on, or you were dealing with grief. And the DSM-5 actually doesn't make that distinction. So it kind of took away that distinction. So for all intents and purposes in the guide, in the DSM-5, they don't really make that difference. But there still are some kind of distinguishing features between grief and depression. So definitely losing someone that you love is a jarring experience, and you just have so much loss. And oftentimes, though, you'll still be able to think about that person and have memories that kind of lift your spirits, even if they still have episodes where you're crying and those moods are coming down. Whereas with depression, oftentimes you're just having a depressed mood that doesn't abate, no matter what's happening, no matter what you're thinking about, no matter what memories you're having. There's just nothing that brings you joy. So oftentimes when someone is grieving, it's almost this like emotional roller coaster, where you'll have times when you're thinking about all these great moments that you had with your loved one, followed by moments where you are crashing and you're having, and you're just having torrents of tears. And that's completely normal with grief. So I think it's really important when you're grieving that you give yourself time to really feel your feelings, and to know where you are. So I mentioned a lot about the Beck's Depression Inventory. One of the reasons I like it is because it helps people to kind of stay on top of their symptoms and know where they are. So it's one of those assessments that you can take, and you can kind of compare, how you're doing. Because anyone who has a history of depression is at higher incidence for having another episode. So it's important to stay on top of that. And so that's one of the reasons that I like the Beck's Depression Inventory. There are other inventories out there, but that's one of the reasons that I like that one in particular. But, while you don't have to have something happen to become depressed, there are definitely life events and triggers that can increase your risk for it. And definitely the loss of someone that you love can be, one of those things that could trigger you into declining to the point that you do meet the criteria, for depression. So it's really important that you always, stay on top of your mental health regardless of what you're going through, but especially when you're in a season of grief and you're in a season of sadness that's pervasive. So when you're in a season of grief, there's a lot of things that you can do and other people can do to kind of help you, and everyone grieves differently. So it's always important to recognize that, the way that what works for you may not work for someone else. But in general, whenever someone means a lot to you, it's important to acknowledge their life and their memory. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. For me, one of the ways that was really important to do that was to help my family remember my mom. So one of the things that bothered me the most well, there are a lot of things that bother me about losing my mom. Obviously, just the loss of her, not being able to reach out and touch her and that sort of thing. But also the knowledge that my future children would never have the opportunity to meet my mom. And so one thing that was important to me was to create something so that I could introduce my kids to my mom, somewhere in the future. And so that's where, things that you can do to help with that. And for me, one of those things was to work on, the program that we created for my mom for her homegoing celebration. And this may not be something that you can do right when you're going through the process of grieving, which I'm still going through, but doing something that helps you to remember the person and their legacy, and also makes it easier for you to teach your future generations about the importance of that person in your life. So that was something that was really important to me. And of course, everyone grieves differently. But it's important that you find out what brings you comfort and what works for you. So it was a labor of love for my brother and I putting this together. And it was also very, very healing. And because I had to get in contact with all of my family, because I've only known my mom in the role of her being my mother. And she's played so many roles, and she's, just an amazing woman. So to be able to listen to other people talk about how she impacted them. So when you're going through grief, I think one of the beautiful things that oftentimes people will do is get together and just, talk about how that person has impacted your life. And so a lot of those stories and everything, became part of the program that we put together, where we just really talked about my mom's life and, had the opportunity to kind of to write her obituary, which was definitely one of the hardest things I've ever written. And then also, all the beautiful memories that we continue to have as a family and that we'll have for years to come, because although physically my mom is not here, she's never going to leave us, and it's important to us that we honor her legacy and the impact that she continues to make on the world, although she's no longer here. So, I have to thank my entire family who donated their time and their love and their attention. Have to thank Gail of Gail and Wynn Funeral Home in Orlando for helping us put this together, and just wanted to come on and discuss that, because I know that person had, and thank you, Erica, who was asking me the question about the difference between depression and grief, asked me that a while ago, and at the time I just really couldn't even go there. But I do think it's important to recognize some of the distinctions, and to recognize what depression is, and so that if you feel like you're slipping into a major depression, that you get the help that you need. So I'm going to put in the links, or in the comments, a link to the Beck's Depression Inventory, which is one of the guides that I like to use, because sometimes just looking at the DSM criteria, those 9 symptoms that you have to have 5 of for at least 2 weeks to be diagnosed with depression, sometimes that's a little bit hard. And the Beck's Depression Inventory is a lot easier to take. So, but I think it's important, especially if you have a history of depression and you're going through something that could be a trigger for you to decline, it's really important to stay on top of that. So I hope that this was helpful for you, for all of you who are going through a period of loss right now. I am totally with you. And want to thank everyone who has been so supportive to me and to my family as we're going through our season. And this weekend, I just hope that you would really spend time with the people that you love and people that pour into you. And, pay attention to who comes into your life during these seasons, and pay attention to those moments of brightness, where you can see God, or you can see a greater kind of something greater at work. It's hard to, but it's interesting that even in your darkest periods of time, there can be these moments, just these moments that may not last very long, that help you to realize that people are still with you. So I just wanted to come on really quickly and just encourage those of you who are going through a period of grief. Thank everyone who's been with me and been with my family, and just express my gratitude with all of that. So again, my name is Dr. Delicia Haynes. I'm the founder and CEO of Family First Health Center. I'm also a medical student mental health advocate, so I shine a light for medical students in their darkest hour, helping them overcome stress and depression. And most importantly right now, I'm Marilyn's daughter, always and forever. I hope you guys have an amazing weekend, and I will talk to you later. Take care.